There, nestled against his pulse, by Hewson. Chapter 9. They gathered on the bridge, staring up at hollow screens as Allura debriefs them on their next mission. Slob and the Olkari still need our help to gather materials for the building efforts. Some of the components are too far away for any other vessel to travel, except by the castle's wormhole capability. However, there will be a rotation of at least 2 paladins on Olkarian at all times, as we won't be needing the whole team for this, and additionally to provide deterrent to border skirmishes.
We'll switch off every time the castle comes back to drop off the cargo, Shiro adds. As for teams, Corinne has helpfully put together a spreadsheet, taking into account which lions are best suited for each mission. We don't get to choose, Hunk asks. Lance throws an arm over Hunk's shoulders. Oh, it's okay, buddy. We'll pair up sooner or later. That's what I'm worried about. I'm always stuck listening to you rambling on and on about the exact shade of... Let's see that spreadsheet, Corinne, says Lance with his hand halfway stuffed into Huck's mouth. Who's gonna be playing inside and who's out on collecting duty? Well, Corinne says, idly eyeing the saliva sliding down Lance's wrist. First up on patrol is you and Bridge, actually. Great! I get Lance's love poetry out of myself, grumbles Bench. Lance puts her in a headlock. She bites his arm, the one drenched in Hunk spit. Corinne continues, willfully ignoring the spectacle beside him. Keith, Hunk, and Shiro will be helping me and the princess retrieve some Eucalibur crystals from a flaming asteroid belt that, interestingly enough, closely occupies the same neighborhood as a black hole. None of that sounds remotely possible, says Hunk. You can't have on-fire asteroids unless they're burning through a planet's atmosphere. What's our ETA to Olkarian? Keith interrupts. There must be something about his tone because everyone turns to him slowly, the lightheartedness falling from their faces. 20 minutes, Shiro answers after a beat. Keith nods. How long will retrieving the crystals take? Corinne taps something on one of the hollow screens. With a wormhole, we'll be in the Crinks system in a tick, but actually collecting the crystals is a painstaking process and will most likely take us the whole day, and that's not factoring in breaks. I see. Princess, you mentioned border skirmishes. How often do those happen? Is Olkarian in danger?
Rhino reported 1 failed attempt 2 movements ago, Allura replies. But the last one before that was about 3 themes ago. They're not in any immediate danger, but since the construction is picked up, with newer plans being implemented, the coalition agreed extra security wouldn't be amiss. Until this particular phase is finished, at least.
Is there something you're worried about, Keith? Shiro asks.
Keith stares up at the hollow screens, watching Olkari rotate slowly.
Lance screams. No, he says. 2 hours later, the cargo is safely unloaded and put into storage on Olkarian. With the castle prepped for takeoff, the team, minus Pidge and Lance, will be heading back out to space in 10 minutes. They're clustered around the base of the loading dock, chatting casually and exchanging good-natured ribbing about which team's going to have the shit luck of running into Galra troops, because that happens way too often. Anyways, if they do come for us, Lance jerks a thumb over his shoulder at Blue seated in the distance. Blue and I can handle them, no problem. Who's the one with terrain advantage here? Pidge teases, elbowing Lance. I can practically call on the forest to choke a bitch. First of all, says Lance, Shiro, Pidge just fucking swore. I mean, you just said something worse, actually, says Shiro. Second, if the Cobra come, it'll be from space, so that means we'll be fighting in space, which means no fancy earthbending from you. Lance finishes looking down his nose at Paige and wearing a haughty smile. Fuck you, says Paige right before she throws herself at Lance's midriff, tackling him to the ground. Shiro, she said fuck! Shiro snorts. Well, she clearly learned it from you. Lance groans. He twists his head, but Paige wraps an arm around his neck. He yells, Red, help me out here! Keith flinches. Red! Lance shouts again, still trying to wiggle his way out from Pidge's death grip. The team laughs as Pidge tightens her hold and Lance comically chokes, eyes bulging. Keith inhales slowly. His hand comes up to grip his elbow, pressing his arms against his body. His rash stings. Should we get going? He quietly asks Karan, standing close by. Karan blinks, looking down at his wrist.
Oh, yes, I suppose we should. Paladins, we'd best be on our way. Lance, Pidge, we'll see you two in a quintet.
Pidge jumps to her feet, saluting them cheekily as they walk away like she's back at the garrison. Lance follows suit, albeit from his haphazard sprawl on the dirt. Have a safe mission, he calls out to them. Don't let a wumblum swallow you! We didn't get swallowed. It was a planned infiltration. Hunk grumbles, stomping up the ramp. Keith follows behind him a pace and is the last of them to make it all the way into the ship. He bites his lip. Quickly he glances over his shoulder and sees Lance laugh uproariously at something Pidge just said, arms around his stomach as he rocks on it, his back, mirth written in scrunch of his nose and around his eyes. As he watches, Lance wipes the corner of his eye and, still chuckling, looks up and catches Keith's gaze. He waves. Keith stretches up a thin smile for him and then ducks away. Gathering Yacobir crystals is as painful and dreadful as Karan warned them it would be, and the less said about the whole experience, the better. It takes Hunk, Shiro, and him a day and a half to extract the compounds. They end up tiring quickly, and at one point Allura has to come out and show them how to do it herself. It was a humbling experience. But now, they're back on Olkarian, and Keith can stop feeling like someone's holding a knife to his neck. You guys took a little longer than expected, Lance says, sidling up to him the moment his feet hit dirt. Thought you might have run into trouble. The only trouble out there was the threat of Hunk projectile vomiting from the fumes of those freaking asteroids. Keith mutters, eyeing the way Slav is practically salivating over the crystals being unloaded. He clears his throat. How was it down here? Anything happened? Lance snorts. Watching Karan read coalition reports all day would have been more entertaining. At least then I can laugh about his mustache twitching every time he finds a typo. Keith hides a smile, reaching up to scratch at an imaginary spot of dirt. Lance nudges him in the side. Hey, I saw that! Don't tell me you don't think the same! The smile grows, but Keith admits to nothing. He shifts from one foot to the other. It brings him closer to Lance. Their arms brush lightly. Karan said you and Pidge are on the next away mission. Keith says Hunk will be staying on with you two. Finally! Lance groans. Blue has been itching to get some action, and she's usually so chill. Did he say where we're going? That frozen planet you were stranded on a while back, and some other planet in the same system. I forgot their names. Wait! Lance grabs Keith's arm. Frozen planet! You mean like with the mermaids? I'm gonna see Plaxon and Queen Luxia again? Keith glances over at him and then fixes his gaze back out to Slav, now in a shouting match with Shiro. I guess. Lance smiles widely. That's awesome! I wonder how they're doing. Oh man, it's been so long, I wonder if they remember me. Be careful out there, okay? Keith says. He blinks. He didn't mean to say that. Lance pauses. I already beat the local bad guy down there. Saved all those poor mer people. I think I'll be fine. Keith says nothing, watching the scene in front of him blankly. Shiro just threw Slav across the loading dock. He should find that funny. Lance's hand is still on his arm. Keith crosses his arms and Lance is forced to let go. Right, he says. I'm gonna go clean up. Maybe take a nap. I'm pretty beat. Oh, okay. I'll see you later then. Lance asks, and from the corner of his eye, Keith sees him rub the nape of his neck. Sure. He feels Lance's eyes on him the entire walk back to the ship. Lance leaves for his mission the next day. When Keith finishes morning patrol with Shiro, he walks up to the nearest Olkari and asks if they have work for him, and when they say yes, he throws himself into the physical labor with mindless drive in an effort to make his head stop thinking. He's only away from the construction site when he has to go back on shift with Shiro. In the late hours of the evening, when most of the Olkari have gone home, Shiro has to come drag him away. Alright, it's just you and me here. Shiro puts his hands on his hips. Wanna tell me what's going on? Sitting on one of the armchairs in the guest room Reiner gave them, Keith pulls his knees to his chest and crosses his arms over them, hunching over. Nothing's going on. Is this about your soulmate? Keith raises his head, startled. No. Because if you're still thinking stupid things like you being fitted to kill them, or them blaming you, and keeping all these thoughts bottled up, Shiro begins threateningly. No, I'm still... Keith winces at Shiro's glare. Okay, look, I don't plan on meeting them ever, so that's not the problem. Oh, so there is a problem. Keith slumps back down, face burrowing into his arms. Why does he even try? Maybe I'm wrong, Shiro begins slowly, but does this have to do with me finding you curled up outside Lance's door the night he recovered? Keith lifts his head high enough to send Shiro a baleful look. I thought I told you we weren't going to speak of that. Ever. Kiddo, it's clearly bothering you. If you need to talk it out... No. Keith shakes his head. It's really nothing big. It's just... bad dreams, that's all. Bad dreams? It won't affect my missions, I promise. No, I know. I trust you. Shiro runs a hand through his hair. You really don't want to tell me about it? No. Shiro sighs. And you're sure you'll be fine? Yeah. Keith digs his fingers into his jacket and his ever-present rash protests viciously. He inhales sharply, easing off on the pressure. Ouch! Shiro drops his hands on his hips and walks over to the huge floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at the construction below. Lance will be joining us on the next mission, but I'll be off on a separate assignment with Karan. You two take care of each other, okay? Keith looks out the window, too, at the vivid colors painting the sky. A sky still devoid of any robot lions or castle ships. Yeah, he says. A red-orange planet, clear skies, a lush autumn-colored jungle beneath, overflowing with birdsong and life. Keith pushes yet another overly large fern out of his way, scowling. How much farther until we're there? We'll be right on top of it in a couple more meters, Lance replies. You know, it might be easier if I lead, since I have the map and all. Keith slaps a mosquito off of his suit. What? No, it's fine like this. Dude, I keep having to course correct you every 5 minutes. You wouldn't have to if this damn jungle weren't being such a bitch. Keith grumbles. Lance clears his throat. Listen, is there something you want to tell me, man? No. Why? Lance draws even with him, map flickering away as he drops his arm. You've been kind of weird the past few days. Weird how? Keith absently asks, eyeing the vegetation around them. He thinks he heard something moving. Lance opens his mouth, and right at that moment, the plant next to him rustles wildly. Something leaps out of it with a high-pitched trill, and before it even lands on the ground in front of them, Keith's pushed Lance behind him, his sword up and ready, adrenaline coursing through his body. He blinks at the empty air before him. Looks down. A yellow rabbit-looking thing touches its nose at him, and then scampers off into the underbrush. Weird like that, Lance says dryly. Keith wordlessly puts his Bayard away and starts walking again. His ears burn. Seriously, what's up, buddy? Lance asks, catching up to him. Again, didn't Keith tell them to keep behind the pace? Keith walks faster. Nothing's up. Right, and you totally weren't about to skewer that a bunny for passing by. It's an alien species, Lance. Just because it looks harmless doesn't mean it can't be dangerous. Lance snorts. Yeah, I can practically see the evil in its sparkly pink eyes. How close are we? It's right up ahead. Is this about what happened on Endja? Keith flinches. No. Because if you're mad at me for taking the bullet, I'm not apologizing. They step into a small clearing about 4 paces across on all sides. It looks like they're here. Keith searches for the sign that Slav said would direct them to his hidden blueprints. Distracted, he says, Why would I ever be mad at you? What? Keith blinks, replays back the last second. He flushes. I mean, for something like that. You saved my life. Why would I be mad about that?
Lance gives him an odd look.
You mean you aren't?
No, of course not. That'd be incredibly stupid.
It wasn't obvious before, but the tension around Lance's eyes loosens.
I just wasn't sure.
He clears his throat again and pulls up their mission file.
'Cause you haven't really looked me in the eye recently.
Keith stops short. He stares blankly at the moss he was inspecting.
Crap!
He didn't even realize.
And you're more paranoid? Anytime either of us have missions, it's like you think something bad is gonna happen. Hank said that on the crystal mission, your focus was shot to hell. You almost chopped off his head and then Shiro's leg.
Lance laughs. It's a poor attempt, and the sound falls flat when Keith stays quiet.
Dude!
What did Slav say the sign looked like again?
Keith asks curt.
Here!
Lance says, stepping forward and sticking out his arm. He's too close. Keith gives it a glance, pretending not to notice Lance's heavy gaze.
Right. I'll search this side, you take the other. It's gotta be around here somewhere.
He goes back to combing through the vegetation, but Lance doesn't move away, still standing a foot away.
You know you can tell me things, right?
He says after a moment. Keith keeps digging through the damp red moss.
I know.
Like, we're friends, right?
The moss yields nothing, and Keith stomps off to a random batch of big ferns.
Keith, are you...
Can we not do this right now?
Keith asks, roughly sifting through the ferns.
Lance huffs, annoyed. Then when do you want to do it? Because, you still won't look at me.
Keith clenches his jaw.
Lance, we have a mission. Let's just find the prince and go home, okay?
A beat. And then Lance says,
Okay.
Silence reigns over them as they scour the place for Slav's hidden compartment. After 10 minutes, they find it, the sign carved into the base of a tree at the edge of the clearing. Under the roots lies the tightly sealed chest containing 10 data chips worth of mathematical formulae and engineering plans. Slav had time to hide some of his work before the Galra imprisoned him. They retrieve it and make their way back to Red with no further complications. In the cockpit, Keith carefully stores the chest, checks Red's systems, and gets ready for takeoff. Lance stands by Keith's chair with a hand on the headset, watching quietly. The coordinates for Clarion are keyed in, and Keith settles into his seat. He can see blue armor at the corner of his eye.
Do you trust me?
Keith asks. Oxygen hisses near silent through Red's ventilation. Through the view screen, strange birds fly over the canopy, weaving in and out of the trees. Far in the distance are a line of mountains, rounded but flat at the top. Clouds are gathered around them.
You know I do,
Keith says quiet.
Then you know you can trust me with this, whatever it is, right?
Keith wraps his hands around the controls, staring out at the view screen. He exhales.
Strap yourself in.
Strap myself! Lance straightens affronted. We've never needed to use a freaking seatbelt!
It's much harder than it should be, but Keith turns and makes himself stare Lance straight in the eyes. He grips the controls tighter, the fabric of his suit squeaking. Lance blinks, mouth closing. The scowl he wears eases slightly.
Keith, you...
Please,
Keith says barely above a whisper.
Strap in.
For a second, it seems like Lance didn't hear him. He doesn't move a muscle. And then his expression cycles through multiple emotions, too quick for Keith to identify before it closes off.
Guess that answers my question,
he says. He walks out of the cockpit, shoulders slumped and mouth pressed into a thin line. The door hisses shut. Somehow it's louder than if Lance had been able to slam it. They arrive back at the castle 5 minutes later. Red hasn't even fully opened his mouth before Lance jumps out and slinks away silently.
Wow, how nostalgic. Haven't seen that in a while.
Keith turns to his right.
Shiro stands there, helmet under his arm and a bulging sack over his shoulder. Mission went well? Keith asks. Yeah, though evidently yours didn't. Keith gestures to the chest in his arms. Hey, we got our objective. He starts walking, wanting to drop the heavy thing off with Allura as soon as possible. Shiro follows, hitching the sack higher with a grunt. What'd you do? He asks. What makes you think I did anything? Shiro gives him a sardonic look. Lance wasn't the one brooding and glaring at nothing for the past week. I don't brood. He came to me, says Shiro, abrupt. Yesterday. He asked about you. They've arrived at the elevator, the doors sliding open to let Shiro step through. He looks back, raising an eyebrow at Keith standing there. You coming in? Keith jerks back to life and steps past the doors. His arms tighten around the chest, and he busies himself with cataloging the dents and scratches on it. He was worried about you, Shiro continues. He presses the button for the bridge. That maybe you were upset about something. He asked if I knew anything, if he could help somehow. I said you hadn't told me much, but that if there was anyone other than myself that you'd talk to, it'd be him. Shiro, do you remember what I told you back at the garrison? Keith sighs. He's trying, but you need to give him something to work with, Keith. I know, Keith mumbled. He traces the divots in the metal of the chest. He tried. He asked me if I trusted him enough to talk to him. Keith digs a nail into a groove. I told him to put a seatbelt on. Shiro breathes in, slow. Ah! The elevator chimes and the doors open. No one moves for a long moment, and then Keith gives himself a shake. He makes off for the bridge, with Shiro a beat behind. They reach the double doors, sliding open to reveal Koran and Allura peering up at the holoscreens, conversation flowing quietly between them. You two look busy, Shiro comments. He crosses the room in 5 strides, placing the bag on the floor by the dais. Koran, shouldn't you be resting? That plant monster we bumped into got you pretty badly in the stomach. What? Allura asks. She turns to Koran, frowning, just to catch him in the middle of miming, No! to Shiro. He stops, arms crossing behind his back with a sheepish smile. You were injured on the mission. Koran, what have I told you about neglecting yourself for the coalition? Princess, Koran begins placatingly, it was just an accident. I foolishly startled the poor thing and it reacted a tad violently. But it was barely a tap, a friendly poke, if you will. The plant monster flung him through 3 trees and into a wall of obsidian rock, said Shiro. If he wasn't Altean and wearing a suit, he'd be food goo. As it is, he's probably got a nasty bruise. Koran! Allura puts her hands on her hips. I can see why Keith says to never trust you. Koran grouses, giving Shiro the mother of all stank faces. No one ever believes me, Hunk mutters, settling the chest by the sack with a grunt. Has Lance debriefed yet? I thought he was coming up with you two, Allura says, turning your attention away from Koran, who sags in relief. Is something the matter? Keith unlocks the chest, squatting down to check the contents aimlessly. It's nothing. I've got my report ready if you want to hear it now, Princess. Allura exchanges a look with Shiro and shrugs gracefully. Please, go ahead. Keith gives her the rundown, stripped of all the dialogue with Lance, of course, and it barely takes a minute. He heaves the chest up on the dais for her to sift through the contents and stands with a groan, stretching out his back. Well done, then. Allura claps her hands together. Great teamwork, as usual. You know, Keith, I'm truly glad that you and Lance have grown so close to each other. Keith blinks and looks off to the side. Oh, thanks. Could I go get something to eat? I'm starving. Shiro can debrief without me, right? Of course. We'll be fine. Health comes first. Allura makes a shooing motion at him. Oh, and would you mind escorting Koran to his room before it slips his mind that he's in need of rest? Sure thing, Princess. Keith grins. Come on, Koran, before she gets angry. As if to punctuate Keith's statement, Allura sends Koran a stern look. Corinne scuttles over to Keith, hands raised. I'm going, princess, I'm going. Keith sees Corinne to his room, chuckling when the man falls dead asleep on his bed before the door even closes. He heads to the kitchen and grabs a juice pouch, drinking it idly as he rummages through the cupboards. There's nothing appetizing to be found, but despite what he told Allura, he's not here for the food. He's waiting. After a mission, Lance is the one who gets hungry. You need to give him something to work with, Shiro said. Keith slides into a seat by the island counter, flicking at the crumbs scattered on the countertop. It's just a dream, he mutters to himself. And it wasn't even that scary. It shouldn't be this hard to... Hi, Lance. Sorry I acted like an emo today, he says mockingly around his straw. I keep seeing my hand punch through your chest. Yeah, that'll go over well. He props his chin in his hand, changes his mind, and lays his head down in the crook of his elbow. Straightens up because that position makes his rash sting and his back ache. Settles for leaning back into his seat with his feet on the table. Hunk would yell, but he isn't here, so whatever. Keith leans his head on the backrest, sucking down the last of the juice and letting the pouch dangle from his mouth by the straw. He glances at the clock, watches it tick. 10 minutes pass, but Lance doesn't show up. Keith leaves the juice pouch for him on the counter anyway. They're back on old Karian soil, the sunset painting the world pink and orange through the castle windows. Keith stands 20 feet from the bridge doors, wishing the Galra would decide to attack tonight, just so he could postpone this moment until he doesn't feel like his intestines are about to explode. It shouldn't be this hard, he tells himself again. Just walk in there. Who knows, maybe he got fed up enough that he's not even there. Come on, Kogane, get this over with. He lays his palm flat over his elbow, pressing the fabric of his jacket against his irritated skin, the sparks of pain grounding him. He takes a deep breath and strides forward. The doors let him through, and Keith's not sure if it's a good thing to see that Lance hasn't skipped out on him. He slows down, approaching the dais with his veins threatening to burst with every thump of his heart. Hey, he says, gingerly taking a seat farther away than usual. Lance scuffs his shoes on the floor. Hey! Okay, so far so good. He doesn't seem that angry, Keith thinks. I didn't think you'd show up. Lance scratches his neck, ears go bank. Yeah! He clears his throat. Sorry I walked out like that. No, don't apologize. It's not your fault. That gets Lance to stare at him for a long second, but then he ducks his head and nods jerkily. Keith looks away, hands moving to the edge of the dais, gripping the metal firmly. I'm the one who's sorry. You were just worried for me, and I... It's fine, Keith, I get it. No, I owe you an explanation. You really don't, buddy. We're friends, right? Keith asks, and then he's looking at Lance properly for the first time in days. There are soft baby hairs curling at Lance's temple, short and fluffy. Keith bets they feel like clouds. Freckles dot Lance's cheeks, more than Keith remembers there being, lying golden on his skin. Keith finds his eyes drawn to the red mark at the edge of Lance's chin, and he knows if he looks at Lance's palm, he'll find a matching one, left behind from Lance resting his face in his hand. Keith's looking at Lance, and nobody's screaming, and there's no red leaking from anyone's mouth. He exhales. We're friends, he repeats, and I trust you. Okay, says Lance, and it's more of a whisper, quiet as it is. Keith drops his gaze to Lance's neck. It's not even anything important, he begins haltingly. I just had a really, really bad nightmare, and it won't leave my head, and I guess it affected me more than I realized. Oh! Keith hubs. Yeah, stupid, right? But when he looks back up, Lance only looks concerned, and that... Keith wasn't expecting that. Do you want to talk about it? He asks. Keith makes a face, pulling a surprised laugh from Lance. Not unless you want nightmares too.
I guess not. I mean, I got a note from that time Corinne modeled traditional Uluru jewelry for us.
Lance shudders so vigorously that Keith laughs. Lance smiles, but it fades away too quickly, leaving behind a pensive look in his eyes.
Was it about your soulmate? The nightmare?
Keith blinks. That's... Yeah, you could say that. How'd you guess?
You're not afraid of much, buddy.
Lance smiles humorlessly.
I know only one thing that could hit you that hard. Well, besides something happening to Shiro again.
Keith studies Lance, the slope of his nose, and the dip under his bottom lip. He looks away. There's actually a lot of things I'm afraid of.
Well, you can stop now,
Lance says, firm.
What?
Lance's ears are full-blown red, but he fixes Keith with a determined look.
You can stop worrying yourself sick over all of it, I mean, he says, because I'm here. For you. So you don't need to stress so much.
Keith opens his mouth, but Lance just barrels over him, which is great because Keith's 80% sure he was just about to say something dumb like, I love you so much that I would hunt down every single thing that made you happy just to give it to you. And yes, I would give you an ocean. I would give you 5,000 oceans. I would bottle up a rainstorm for you.
And you have everyone else too, Lance says. The entire team cares about you, you know? You don't need to carry that all by yourself. Let us do some of the worrying, okay?
Keith squeezes the edge of the dais harder and the metal squeaks. God, wow. Okay, where is the nearest ocean? How does one even go about acquiring an entire body of water? Right, he says, and it comes out raspier than he intended. He clears his throat. Okay, it was just a silly nightmare, but thanks. That means a lot, Lance. Lance smiles and scoots over until they're flush against each other. He nudges Keith's shoulder with his own. It's a pointless, sweet little action, but Keith falls that much more in love. He runs the numbers in his head. How much would it cost to buy a planet around here? He thinks he probably had at least $6 in his bank account. Wait, what's the currency exchange rate in space?
I'm not just talking about nightmares,
Lance says, jolting Keith out of his spiraling thoughts.
You know, if there's one thing we have in common, it's that we keep things to ourselves until someone forces it out for us.
But Shiro said it was our mutual drive to be the other at every possible thing, right down to who can brush their teeth faster, says Keith, only half joking.
What? He said that? We have never raced to see who could...
Lance squints.
You're joking! I hate your face! How is it so blank all the time?
Are you calling me an airhead? Lance raises his hands.
Oh no, we are not getting into this right now! I'm trying to tell you we can depend on each other more, okay?
I know. And Keith start to bump their shoulders together. He smiles. I hear you, Lance. I know. Lance pauses, hands still in the air. He lowers them slowly, blue eyes searching Keith's face for something. Whatever it is, he finds it. Strangely, his ears go pink again. Keith resists the urge to reach out to see how hot they'd feel under his fingers. Instead, he says, I can see why you said I sucked at the comforting thing. You're much better at it. Maybe if they keep talking, he'll be able to keep his hands to himself. Lance's thigh is already too close to where his fingers have dug into the metal. He hopes he hasn't dented the dais. Corinne would kill him.
I don't know, Red.
Lance laughs.
I kind of liked it those times you tried the comforting thing for me. It was sweet. Awkward, but sweet.
I try, Keith says, trying to ignore the unholy screeching in his mind and the flesh coming up his neck. He ducks behind his hair, staring down at his boots. Softly, he adds, Really, though. Thank you, Lance.
Anytime, Red,
says Lance, just as soft, and Keith doesn't have to look up to know what the curve of his mouth looks like.